Hey, it's Zoe. Have you ever been given feedback that what you said had enormous implications for the people around the room or in that particular interaction? Yeah, it can be really confronting. So today we're taking a deep dive into that beautiful territory that we need to navigate, people reading, specifically around language patterns and what we say and the impact that it has. Let's do it.
Welcome to the Zoe Roth Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
You'd be surprised to know how many times I get calls from prospective clients saying that we need to work on somebody's emotional intelligence. And it's almost like they put air quotes around that word, emotional intelligence. When I ran a workshop last week, I asked them that. What do you think we mean when we say we need to work on someone's emotional intelligence? And what they came back with was basically that person is really not self-aware. They're not aware of how their behavior and their language is impacting on others. And they are not able to control and master their emotions. So they come across as erratic, emotive, explosive, or unpredictable. So you never know whether you're getting happy John or miserable John. And so these kinds of things put us offside and scare us. Then I asked the question to the group, what are you working on? What emotional intelligence do you want to work on? And really what came back was, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that scares other people. I don't want to be the person that puts other people off. I don't want to say or do something that causes distress to others. I think that's a beautiful, lovely gesture, isn't it? When we get given that feedback of how what we said or what we did was off-putting at best for others and perhaps intimidating or insulting, then it's really confronting. We can feel aghast that our intentions had been so misaligned to the outcome. And I think that's true, right? I don't think any poor behavior is necessarily intentional. I don't think, and I don't believe, that people get up and go to work and decide to be complete jerk-offs. I think, perhaps, that there are contributing factors that lead to people not behaving in their best way, whether that's lack of skill or lack of awareness, or whether it's something else troubling them. So in the work that I do with leaders around emotional intelligence, we look at map reading skills, trying to look at someone's behavior and map what might be driving that. And there's a number of different tools that I use with that. We look at what are the responses to change that might be underneath the particular behavior. So if someone is really angry or irritated around a decision, say, for example, it could be one of the significant change triggers has been touched by the announcement or by the decision. And so we use tools like that to map out and try and understand what could be below the surface of somebody's behavior. And then what we did is we navigate. We learn navigation tools. And I think one of the most important navigation tools to pay attention to is language patterns, because those are really good indicators of how we might be receiving or broadcasting to others. And it's something that we don't pay a lot of attention to. When it comes to conflict or difficult situations with people, we have what's sometimes called an amygdala hijack. You might have heard that term. It's really big in the neuroscience at the moment. And an amygdala hijack is basically when our primitive brain, that little almond-shaped organ, which is at the base of our brain stem, filters through new information that's coming in from a new situation or a new relationship or a new interaction and assesses it for threat or safety. If the amygdala decides that it's a threatening situation, then they trigger off a chain reaction of chemicals in the body designed to prepare us to fight to the death or to run away or just to freeze, paralyze. So that's our fight or flight response is the amygdala. A hijack means that when the amygdala is fired, what happens is the executive brain gets shut down for a little while. So all of our rational thinking, our capacity for language, our capacity to learn just gets parked while we deal with the survival mechanisms. When that happens, our short-term memory goes, and we find it really difficult to articulate a rational explanation of what's happening. So if you've ever been in an argument and you find yourself going around and around in circles in the conversation and just not being able to express yourself properly or to feel heard, or after the conversation you walk away and go, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that, but in the conversation you just feel frozen. It's because the amygdala has activated and you are being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and those chemicals are all about pumping you up for a fight or a flight. They're not about helping you learn and to negotiate and to feel rapport with others. It's very primal. Now, the thing is, all the neuroscience lately has shown that we don't need a saber-toothed tiger to come and chase us down in order to feel triggered by the amygdala. There are contemporary workplace threats that do the job just well enough. Thank you. Things like uncertainty, things like threat to your sense of belonging. Are you part of the tribe or are you not part of the tribe? Things like fairness, things like losing your autonomy. So if a decision gets made for you and things are happening to you, this can trigger a survival mechanism. Overwork is another. And another one is a status threat. So if you've ever been pushed aside to allow somebody else through, or you lose a title, this can be really challenging, or you go from having your own office to sharing an office, these are all status signals that cause us to feel threatened. So all those types of things can cause us to go into an amygdala hijack, which means we're not in a very good condition to relate to others. Now, what's interesting is that when we think amygdala hijack and fight or flight, we think aggression, people showing up with knives or guns or whatever. It doesn't necessarily look like that in day-to-day situations. So I want to run through some of the language signals that will show you whether you or somebody else is having an amygdala hijack and therefore not undertaking a constructive conversation. So if you get into an amygdala hijack, you basically need to call time out. And it takes about 20 minutes for the biochemicals to reduce so that you can get your executive brain back online and your short-term memory comes back more fully. So you really do have to go and diffuse, walk it off, do some deep breathing, get out of there for 20 minutes. So in the heat of the moment, though, this is what you're likely to experience if you're having an amygdala hijack, either you or another person, or both of you, which is worse because no one's thinking rationally. It's all emotion. So these are the language signals that you get. First of all, we talk about back talk. Back talk is the pattern of language that is in the fight mode. So when we have back talk, it looks like dominating language. So somebody raises their voice or leans over you or points their finger. So there's some physical cues as well as language cues. They use absolutes like you must, you should, you need. Yeah, you can already feel the tension coming into the voice as you hear those commands coming, right? So those are examples of a fight modality in backtalk. Being dismissive is another way of demonstrating aggression, or passive aggression, if you like. And direct attacks, like verbal attacks or criticisms that are really personal in nature, those are all back talk mechanisms, and they are in the fight mode. So if you experience any of those, whether you're dishing them out or receiving them, you know that the amygdala has been triggered and nothing useful is going to happen when you stay in conversation when somebody's doing the fight, aggressive back talk mode. Now, slightly more subtle are the passive aggressive modes, and there's two of them. There's sour talk and sweet talk. Let's talk about sour talk. Sour talk, this is kind of the nastiness stuff. This is like the little needling that you get of people, or sarcastic remarks that are a bit cutting and biting. Or if people are trying to do a bit of flight, they might be avoiding the conversation, changing the subject, or withdrawing. These are all kind of sour talk. You just know that something is not going right and it's souring between the two of you, or three of you, or however many people there are. So if those things start to come up, sour talk, sarcasm, changing the subject, withdrawing, or just having little cutting remarks, you know that bang, bang, the amygdala is triggered and nothing productive is going to happen then. The other passive-aggressive mode, or the flight mode, is sweet talk. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think that this is an amygdala hijack one. It's very subtle. So if you're trying to sugarcoat something or trying to soften the blow a little, it's likely that you feel fearful of the consequences of the conversation, either for yourself or for the other person. And when we skirt around issues and talk in roundabout ways, we're doing an avoidance dance here, and it's not really that helpful. And that can cause a lot of well, it's hard to get to the point, isn't it? When somebody's skirting around the issue and it just kind of builds frustration. So those are signs that you're in, or the other person is in a flight mode, i.e. amygdala hijack. Hello. So it's interesting when you see this in situ. I remember working for a boss, and I went in to challenge him on a particular decision that he made. And I believe I had legitimate concerns about how it was handled. I feared for the consequences more broadly in the culture. So I raised this issue with him. And he kind of exploded. Let's just put it that way. His face went red. He got really curt. He got loud in his voice. And he said something to the effect of, they have no right to the bonus that you want to give them. They betrayed us and they let us down. Like, it was really strong, dramatic language. And also coupled with the scariness of a big guy getting red in the face, raising his voice and pointing. You can imagine, I went into amygdala hijack and I stopped the discussion and left. I executed my right to flight because I was scared. So obviously nothing constructive happened in that conversation. And in the end, nothing constructive came of my raising the issue at all, because he went with his decision, and that was that. Didn't really have a chance to explore the cultural issues. And they did have an impact, and I'm sorry to say that I didn't have the courage to address it further, to stop it from happening. But I did learn from it. Here's another example of sour talk. I was facilitating a change workshop with an organization that was going through incredible change. They had been told that they were going to relocate to another city. No consultation with the staff, and people who'd worked at the organization for 20 years were then in doubt about their future because they didn't necessarily want to uproot their family and move to a whole new city. Like, this was a massive disruption. Plus, there was a lot of other factors in this move, like, would it be viable? Could they get the people that they needed to deliver that? Was there even a building in the town that would be suitable for them? And in that workshop, so I was there to facilitate discussion and airing of grievances around this to help build a sense of solidarity within the team. A lot of the team had already left. They're like, no, I'm not going, I'm leaving. And so this was what I walked into. As you can imagine, there was a massive bunch of amygdala hijacks happening all over the place. So uncertainty was rife, change in status was huge, sense of fairness was highly activated in a lot of people. And what I heard was a lot of sour talk. There was a lot of sarcastic little remarks, little things that are said under their breath, people having outright criticisms of the decision makers. And it was pretty hostile. And then people executed their flight mode and at breaks disappeared and didn't come back. Yeah, if I was a less experienced facilitator, I would definitely take it personally. But this was a volatile mess. And this is what triggered it. All those sarcastic remarks, it's not because people were nasty or even that they lacked emotional intelligence. It's just that they were so much in survival mode that it was bursting out of the seams. Their amygdala was guiding and leading the charge, and it just came out in that way. Oh, yeah, it's a pretty tough situation. So what do? You have to just keep going. Call it as it is, give people time out, give them opportunities to express themselves, to purge, and bring awareness to what they were doing. So when I did that, when I brought awareness to the triggers that they were experiencing, it helped. So knowing the change triggers is like knowing a map. It's having a map to interpret the behaviors that you're seeing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about these language patterns. So I've talked a little bit about back talk, sour talk, and sweet talk. There is another set of conversational or language patterns that I think are worth noting that don't necessarily show up in an amygdala hijack, but can trigger them. And I think when we pay attention to how we use language, we become hugely self-aware. My first foray into that was when I got some feedback, thank you very much, from a boss who wrote me feedback in a letter at the end of the summer, which is a terrible way to deliver feedback via letter, It's like, why couldn't you have given it to me while I was there? So I got this letter from my colleague who ran the summer camp, and he wrote in it, you did this, this, and this well. And then in what seemed like flashing red neon letters said, you sometimes get really emotional and attached to issues when it comes to your team. And that was probably about all he said. And I remember reading this going, what? emotional? What does he mean emotional? What does he mean that I'm attached to the issues around my team? And I just launched into a tirade talking to myself about, because I knew what he was talking about. I was very defensive of my staff, and I disagreed with the decision he made about their accommodation on site and felt like they would feel excluded. They wouldn't have their own place to call home, which would have a knock-on effect on how they felt about the job and therefore their sense of belonging. So I really did feel strongly about this, and I argued to the teeth with him and lost the argument, basically. And so when he wrote that little sentence, I'm like, all that stuff came flooding back. And then I paused, and I had a little laugh. I'm like, he's right. I totally got triggered. Just a sentence in a letter triggered me into emotional defense of the issue. Isn't that interesting? And that kind of started me paying attention to when I get emotional and how I get emotional. And I realized I have a tendency to dramatic language. And this might be you. So dramatic languages means that we take an incident and we tell the story in vivid detail. So we went to a meeting and there was a little bit of tension in the meeting. And somebody asked me afterwards, how was the meeting? I might say something like, it was a simmering cesspit of anxiety. Things were just waiting to blow. Yeah, sounds exciting. If you're telling the story, if you're listening to it, it's like, wow, that sounds pretty intense. And I realized this kind of dramatic tendency in my language showed up a lot. I would exaggerate everything, and I would default to using binaries like the commands, the absolutes of, you never do this. I said to my husband, like, you always come in and tell me how to chop the vegetables. And good on him, he called me out on that. He goes, I always do that? Like every minute of the day? It's like, well, no, but almost always, or quite a lot. And then I realized, actually, when I use those imperatives, those absolutes, what happens is that I rile myself up. I almost put myself in amygdala hijack by doing that. Our language creates vivid pictures, and language is the gateway to emotion. So how we use language is incredibly important. Because if we use it in a dramatic way, guess what? We're creating drama. And when we create drama, we're creating often amygdala hijack. And what happens that's constructive in an amygdala hijack? Nothing. Nothing happens that's constructive unless you're fighting for your life. Okay, that's the one time. So on the other side of dramatic is the downplay. That's when somebody completely softens what's happening. So we take that same scenario, really bad meeting, where there was personal insults and a lot of tension. And if someone was going to do a downplay, they might say something like, you ask them, how was the meeting? And they say, could have been better. Then you know, depends how they use the tone and everything, that it wasn't very good. And that understatement is sometimes as dishonest as the hyperbole of the drama. And I think we need to be mindful of that too. Sometimes we need to downplay stuff so that we don't catastrophize. Far better, though, is between the two. So between dramatic and downplay, we have direct. And when we're direct, we need to be mindful that we're not being brutally direct. We're being accurate in our description. We're kind of being more factual. So a factual or direct way of translating that whole meeting situation would be something like, how was the meeting? Well, there were disagreements and personal insults. So there's no hyperbole, no emotional overlay, no subtle undertone. It was just, that's what happened. And I think when we can master our language signals, we will be more forthright, we will be more considered, we will be more stoic, and we will be more stable in our emotional response, because it's hard to get emotional when we say there were disagreements and personal insults versus it was a complete bloodbath. You imagine a bloodbath. You get riled up by that. So, and I think this whole idea of helping ourselves to be more centered is really critical. And when we're more centered, we're less likely to be triggered, and we're less likely to default to passive-aggressive behaviors or aggressive behaviors or language patterns that don't serve us, and language patterns that cause distress to others. And I think that's really critical. All right, so sum up. What have we learned? We've learned that there's some ways to read behavior. These are map reading tools when it comes to reading people. Things like change triggers, which we went through. And there's a whole heap of them that we could use. I often use DISC, which is a behavior preference model, which I think is a really easy one to teach people, and it helps people to understand patterns of behavior and therefore how to build better rapport and deal with people better. There's understanding things like the drama triangle, how dramatic patterns show up in conversation. So we haven't covered those today, but the change triggers are one map reading tool that you can use in order to note to yourself what's triggering you or what might be triggering somebody else. And then the navigation tools through that are paying attention to your language and being direct instead of dramatic or downplay, and avoiding the fight or flight language tools such as back talk, sour talk, and sweet talk. What you really want is real talk. And real talk is heart to heart. Real talk is direct. Real talk is stable, calm, clear, with good intention. So you show up with warm heart, cool head, and safe hands. Love to hear your feedback on this. Feel free to send me an email, zoe@innercompass.com.au. Let me know what you think of the podcast. If you really love it, rate it on iTunes. That would be fantastic. It helps increase the visibility of the podcast and help get these kind of useful leadership skills and perspectives out into the world. And it helps me get my work out into the world. On another note, I've got something super duper cool to share, the Unconference. The Edge of Leadership Unconference coming up in Canberra, 21-22, March 2019. Very exciting. Our theme is Reset Beyond Achieving. Why do I think this is one of the most critical things we need to address as leaders is that we are confronted with burnout all the time. All the leaders I work with are significantly overworked and stressed out, and this is having a significant impact on their capacity to do the deep thinking that they need to do the deep strategic work that they need to do, the deep mentoring work that they need to do in order to build their capacity. So unless we take a deep dive and reset how we show up, how we think, how we organize our lives, then we're going to be constantly chasing our tail. And so this is 2 days to really take a deep dive into what are your patterns and habits? Are they serving you or are they not? What are some quick tips and hacks that you can use to hack yourself, hack your time, and hack your productivity, and hack your team engagement? And 3, connect with others who are interested in talking a bigger talk, interested in playing a bigger game as leaders, interested in really making a difference that moves beyond their immediate lives as well. So that's the kind of invitation I'm making. This is not a simple practical session, though there is lots of practicality in it. This is really about expanding who you think and how you think of yourself as a leader. It's post-conventional, which means we're going beyond achieving to think about perspective, to think about methodologies where we can elevate and accentuate and extend our leadership impact. Well, if that's you, I'd love to have you join us. Go to edgeofleadershipunconference.com.au. All right, see you soon.